The year is 2011. The world feels different. Instagram is a small startup with no ads. TikTok doesn't exist yet. And in the pockets of millions of people, there is a war going on. It is the middle of the smartphone gold rush. Every company on Earth is fighting to control the future. Nokia is the old giant, slowly dying in the corner. BlackBerry is panicking, watching its empire crumble. Samsung is just starting to wake up. But there is one company standing above them all, a company that feels unstoppable. They aren't just winning, they are defining what a smartphone is. They are the cool kids, the innovators, the ones who are actually beating Apple at their own game. That company is HTC. It is hard to remember this now, but there was a moment in history when HTC was the king. In 2011, this Taiwanese company was worth more than Nokia and BlackBerry combined. Think about that. Nokia had been making phones for decades. BlackBerry owned the business world. And yet, this quiet company from Taiwan had surpassed them both. In the United States, they were the #1 seller of smartphones. They were selling more devices than Samsung. They were selling more devices than the iPhone. They had a market share of 24%. 1 out of every 4 smartphones sold was an HTC. If you walked into a tech office in 2011, the smart engineers didn't have iPhones. They had an HTC. It was a status symbol for people who knew about technology. It said, "I don't just follow the crowd, I want the best machine." They had the first 4G phone, the first metal body. They were the architects of the Android world. But then the lights went out. It didn't happen over 10 years. It happened almost overnight. Just 2 years later, that 24% market share dropped. Not to 15%, not to 10%. It dropped to almost zero. The company that was worth $37 billion lost 95% of its value. They didn't just lose the lead. They evaporated. They became a ghost story. Today, if you see someone with an HTC phone, it looks like an artifact from a lost civilization. A younger generation doesn't even know the name. So, we have to ask the question, how does a king die so quickly? Usually when a giant company fails, it is because they were too slow. Like Kodak or Blockbuster, they refused to change. But HTC was different. They didn't die because they were slow. They died because they were betrayed. They were attacked by lawsuits from Apple, starved by suppliers like Samsung, and then they were destroyed from the inside by their own arrogance. This is not just a story about a phone company. This is a story about how brutal the tech industry really is. It is a lesson that proves that having the best product doesn't matter if you don't have the power to protect it. This is the rise and the silent, tragic death of HTC. To understand how the king died, we first have to understand how he was born. And he wasn't born royalty, he was born a servant. In 1997, in a small office in Taiwan, 3 people, Cher Wang, H.T. Cho, and Peter Cho, founded a company called High-Tech Computer Corporation. They didn't have a grand vision of changing the world. In fact, their first plan was a disaster. They tried to build laptops. They failed. They burned through their capital. The company almost died before it even took its first breath. But Peter Cho, a man known for his relentless, almost obsessive perfectionism, saw a different path. He didn't want to build computers on desks. He wanted to build computers for your hand. They pivoted to handheld devices, PDAs. And this is where the story gets strange. You see, if you were a business executive in the early 2000s, you probably owned an HTC device. You just didn't know it. HTC became what is known as an ODM, an original design manufacturer. They were the ghostwriters of the tech industry. Remember the Compaq iPad? That sleek, silver pocket computer that every CEO had in 2000? Compaq didn't design that. HTC did. The Palm Treo 650, the phone that defined the smartphone before the iPhone existed, HTC built it. They were the invisible engine room of Silicon Valley. Big American brands like HP, Palm, and even Microsoft would come to Taiwan with a rough idea and a checkbook. HTC would take the money, engineer the miracle, and hand it back. The American companies got the glory. HTC got the silence. But in that silence, they were becoming dangerous. While the American brands were focused on marketing and stock prices, HTC was quietly mastering the impossible. They learned how to miniaturize antennas. They learned how to make touchscreens responsive. They became the favorite partner of Bill Gates and Microsoft. By 2005, they were arguably the best mobile hardware engineers on the planet. They were building the Sony Ericsson Xperia X1. They were building the Google Nexus 1. They had the talent, they had the technology, but they had a problem. Imagine being the best painter in the world, but you are only allowed to sign someone else's name on the canvas. Peter Chow and Cher Wang were tired of being ghosts. They looked at the margins. The American brands were making huge profits just for slapping a logo on HTC's work. HTC was doing the heavy lifting and getting pennies on the dollar. They realized that if they wanted to survive, if they wanted to truly matter, they had to step out of the shadows. They had to stop serving the kings and become one. So, in 2006, they made the decision that would change everything. They stopped just taking orders, and they started putting 3 letters on the back of the phone. HTC. The ghost was about to manifest, and the timing couldn't have been better, because a search engine company in California was looking for a partner to fight Apple. In 2007, Apple dropped a bomb on the tech industry. The iPhone changed everything. Over in California, Google was panicking. Google had been secretly working on their own software called Android, but they had a massive problem. Google was a search engine company. They didn't know how to build hardware. They needed a weapon to fight Apple, and they needed someone to forge it. Who do you call when you need the impossible built quickly? You call the ghost. Google partnered with HTC, and in 2008, HTC released the T-Mobile G1, also known as the HTC Dream. It was the world's very first commercial Android phone. It was a little clunky. It had a weird chin, but it proved something vital. Android worked. This was the spark that ignited HTC's golden age. From 2008 to 2011, HTC couldn't miss. They were operating on a level of pure engineering instinct. While other companies were trying to figure out how touchscreens worked, HTC was inventing the future. They gave us the first 4G phone in the United States, the HTC Evo. They created a software layer called HTC Sense that made early Android actually look beautiful, adding that iconic giant flip clock to the home screen that everyone remembers. They were moving so fast that traditional giants couldn't catch them. By the third quarter of 2011, HTC became the largest smartphone vendor in the United States. They had finally put their name on the canvas, and the world loved it. But in the tech industry, success is dangerous. When you wear the crown, you put a target on your back. Steve Jobs was furious about Android. He famously called it a stolen product and vowed to launch thermonuclear war to destroy it. But Apple didn't immediately sue Google. They went after the company that was actually making Android a threat. In 2010, Apple sued HTC. This was a proxy war. HTC was suddenly dragged into a massive, multi-million-dollar legal battle over patents. They fought for 2 years, burning through cash. Finally, in 2012, HTC was forced to settle. The exact terms were kept secret, but the reality was devastating. HTC reportedly had to pay Apple a licensing fee for almost every Android phone they sold. Their profit margins were instantly slashed. But the lawyers were only the first enemy. The second enemy was much, much worse. HTC was brilliant at designing phones, but they didn't make their own parts. They had to buy their screens, processors, and memory from other companies. One of those companies was Samsung. Samsung wasn't just building their own Galaxy phones, they controlled the supply chain. In 2010, HTC released the Nexus 1 and the Desire, using beautiful AMOLED screens bought from Samsung. The phones were massive hits. Then suddenly, Samsung announced a shortage of AMOLED screens. HTC's supply dried up. They were forced to switch to inferior LCD screens halfway through production, damaging their reputation. It was a brutal, completely legal business move. Samsung starved HTC of the parts they needed, while simultaneously unleashing a multi-billion-dollar marketing machine to promote their own Galaxy phones. HTC was outgunned, outspent, and running out of oxygen. When a company starts bleeding, they usually do one of 2 things. They focus on what they do best, or they panic. HTC panicked. This era is known as the scramble. Desperate to reclaim their market share from Samsung and Apple, HTC completely lost its identity. Instead of making 1 or 2 premium, perfect devices, they flooded the market with cheap, confusing junk. They released the HTC Salsa and the HTC Cha-Cha. These were low-budget phones whose only unique feature was a physical button dedicated purely to opening Facebook. It was a complete betrayal of the premium, engineering first brand they had built. It made them look cheap. It made them look desperate. To fix their sinking public image, HTC decided they needed a massive marketing campaign. They signed a $12 million contract with Robert Downey Jr., who was at the absolute peak of his Iron Man fame. They launched a $1 billion marketing push called Here's to Change. The commercials featured Robert Downey Jr. saying random words that started with H, T, and C. Humongous tinfoil catamaran. Hipster troll car wash. It was meant to be quirky and avant-garde. It was an absolute disaster. While Samsung was running ads showing exactly why the Galaxy's big screen and waterproof features were useful, HTC was paying a Hollywood actor to speak gibberish. Consumers were confused. The billions of dollars evaporated and sales continued to plummet. By 2013, HTC's executives knew the end was near. They decided to make one final all-or-nothing gamble. They went back to their roots, no more cheap plastics, no more Facebook buttons. They gathered their engineers and built a masterpiece, the HTC One M7. It was objectively a work of art. It featured a stunning zero-gap aluminum unibody that made the plastic Samsung phones look like toys. It had dual front-facing boom sound speakers that changed how people listened to music on phones. Every tech reviewer on Earth praised it. It won Best Smartphone at the Mobile World Congress. It was the perfect phone, but it didn't matter. Because of their weakened supply chain, HTC couldn't manufacture the metal bodies fast enough. Delays hit. By the time the phone actually reached the shelves, Samsung had carpet-bombed the world with marketing for the Galaxy S4. The M7 sold decently, but it wasn't enough to save the empire. The slow death dragged on for a few more years, but the war was over. In 2017, Google stepped in and bought HTC's smartphone engineering team for $1.1 billion. They took the talent that built the HTC One and used them to build the Google Pixel. The body of HTC died, but its organs were harvested. Today, HTC still exists, mostly making virtual reality headsets. But as a smartphone giant, they are completely obsolete. The downfall of HTC is one of the most important lessons in modern business. They didn't die because they made bad products. They died because they thought engineering was enough. They believed that if you simply built the best machine, the world would reward you. But the tech industry is not a meritocracy. It is an arena. And in the arena, having the best sword doesn't matter if the other guy owns the factory, the judges, and the crowd.